Hello, everyone. Nice to see lots of people are joining. 21 so far. We'll kick things off at 1:05 just to allow for some people to join. Would love to know where everyone's tuning in from. If you can pop into the chat where you're based, would love to hear from you. I'm dialing in from Manly, sunny Manly, working from home today. G'day, Charles, Brizzy, love that. David, Darwin, great. Beck and Paul are both from Orange, awesome. Someone's tuning in from their ute. Love that.
That's good.
Classic. Love that. Amazing. It's going to be a really good webinar today, guys. All right.
New Zealand. Cool.
Oh, wow. Karen's waiting for a cyclone.
Hopefully we can fill in an hour of your time, Karen. Yeah.
All right. Let's get some content sharing. Yes, Tam, good question. We will definitely send a recording and we can try and get the presentation slides out to you as well. Yeah, recording will all be sent out this afternoon. So if you've registered for the webinar and if you haven't been, like if you can't attend, don't worry, it's all good. It'll all be sent out. No worries. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. We'll give it 2 more minutes until we kick things off. We've had this webinar, I think, in the making for about 2 weeks, and already we've had 327 registrations. So it's massive to see so much interest from the community. So thank you again to everyone that has made the time to join us. I know with December and with Christmas just around the corner, it is quite hard to find the time. So we're really grateful. Alrighty, well, I think we can kick things off right now. Just before we get into it, I just want to start with a welcome to country. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and future. So hello, everyone. My name's Jennifer Ross, and I am one of the senior account executives here at AgriWebb, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We have a full house today. I've got my colleague, Jack Yeomans, online. He is working just behind the scenes, just helping with all the Q&A. I've got Lily Rogers as well from Ruminati, who is on the customer success side of things. So if you do have any questions on the support side, she will be here to help. And I am really, really excited to get into today's session because we do have a special guest today, Dr. Will Onus, one of the co-founders at Ruminati. And we'll hear more about Will and what he's doing in this amazing space in just a moment. But today we really wanted to introduce our newest integration partner, Ruminati, and really help you understand the connection between Ruminati and AgriWebb and how that all works. So if I could just ask, if you have any questions, please submit your questions for AgriWebb and Ruminati just down in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to answer these questions at the end of the session. Now, I know a lot of you on this call are already familiar with the AgriWebb story, but I can guarantee there's a few that haven't heard of us before. So what we like to do just at the start is really give you a bit of understanding of AgriWebb, what our mission is and what we're trying to achieve in the industry. But AgriWebb is a livestock business management program that was founded 10 years ago by three of our co-founders, John, Kevin, and Justin. And they ultimately set out to create a solution that empowers the livestock industry with the best tools to feed the world sustainably, profitably, and efficiently. And this mission statement is something that drives every single employee at AgriWebb to get up and go every single day. The picture that you see on the screen is iconic at AgriWebb. It's the problem we're trying to solve for, which is the replacement of the notebook. And all of you would be all too familiar with this. In my role as an account executive, we come across multiple challenges with pen and paper and how this impacts productivity. There's multiple reasons, but just to list a few, there's no backup of data. Once a notebook's lost, it's lost forever and you have to start again. And in the 4 years that I've been at AgriWebb, I've heard some horror stories where the notebooks just run through the wash, it's been dropped in a trough, or in some instances, it's being used as a colouring in book. It creates inefficiencies. So there are multiple places that data is being stored, be it the whiteboard for your paddock map, a diary, which might be multiple books for your cropping and your livestock records. It's a lot of double handling, and that can lead to user error and inconsistent record keeping. And for the larger families, it's really difficult to share information. It's especially challenging when there are multiple people involved with different responsibilities, and it's really difficult to share that knowledge when it all comes from one notebook. So it's really trying to make things a lot more transparent, allowing people to be on the same page. But with everything I've just said here, it creates an opportunity for digital tools like AgriWebb to solve. And we've created something pretty spectacular that allows you, the producer, to collect information from your mobile phone, online, offline, in a standardized way. So we've developed a mobile application that works online and offline. And the web portal that you can see on the screen is something that can be used on multiple browsers. We've designed AgriWebb to help you visualize your farming operation and allow you to connect your entire workforce so everybody's on the same page. And you can see data and insights that helps you drive decisions on farm every single day. So earlier in the year, we launched this wonderful concept called the AgriWebb Marketplace. And we introduced this because we know a lot of our customers want to integrate their internal systems with AgriWebb. And in a short time, we've managed to bring on board 10 partners across 4 different verticals, and this list will continue to evolve. Some to point out already: pasture management with SIBO Labs and their satellite imagery, water management. So we've got a few there with FarmBot, AgBot, Farmo, your animal tracking. So connecting all of your hardware and getting that real-time information in the yards. And our newest addition, the emissions calculator with Ruminati. And on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Will Onus, the co-founder, one of the co-founders at Ruminati. And just to give you a bit of a background, so Will is a Meat and Livestock Australia red meat ambassador who has over 15 years of experience as a farm operator. Together with his wife, Simone, Will currently runs Woodside, a 2,500 hectare grazing enterprise in Tumut, which is home to a fine wool flock, a store lamb enterprise, and an Angus breeding herd producing feeder steers. It's a pleasure to have you on today, Will. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Really appreciate the opportunity. I feel I should just clear one thing up before we start. I'm not actually a doctor. That was a joke that I made. So I do apologize. It was probably a bad time to make said joke, but I'm, just a humble farmer, have yet to receive my doctorate in anything to date. So apologies for the stitch up, Jen. Thank you all. I'll just duck over to share the slide deck now. Just confirming that everyone can see that now. Jen, is that coming up on your screen?
Perfect. Yeah, good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending and for giving us a moment of your time. Totally appreciate that there's plenty happening on the farm this time of year, and very grateful for the opportunity. Also, a huge thank you to AgriWebb. The opportunity to be up on the marketplace has been a big milestone for us, and certainly the integration is proving really, really valuable. So thanks to the AgriWebb team and commend them on the work they're doing on the marketplace. I think it's a really important initiative. So as Jen said, I'm a sheep and cattle producer from Tumut, just outside of Canberra, sort of between Sydney and Melbourne, and have been there operating a beef and wool enterprise for the last 15 years. There's the farm up on AgriWebb, and essentially myself and one of the other co-founders, who's also a farmer down the road from me, really started hearing agriculture and emissions being used in the same sentence and in the same newspaper articles a few years ago, about 3 years ago now, and wanted to explore what that space was like and really what was going on, and ultimately how we could start to talk about practice changes we were adopting in our business, and what frameworks were available for us to do that. And we sort of identified a bit of a missing mechanism in the sense that there wasn't a clear way that farmers could talk about practice change on farm and things that they were doing in terms of emission reduction or sustainability more generally in a simple, concise manner that didn't require a lot of time or a lot of potential investment from consultants. So we set about trying to solve for that, and we're really lucky to meet some of the academics that have been working in this space for quite some time, Richard Eckard and the team at University of Melbourne, along with a fellow now, our CEO, Peter Lean, who had a long career in CSIRO, amongst other things, and really started to pull together a team to solve this using technology. I think similar to the approach that AgriWebb's taken, technology provides a really great opportunity for us as producers to simplify what we're doing and be more efficient and optimize, I guess, our storytelling using data, but also our farm management. So lots of synergies there, but that's really how the organization came to be. And what I'd love to do today is, I guess, talk through what we've been really fortunate over the last 2 years to work with some really large organizations, complex supply chains in Australia, and also that have a global footprint in some instances, and talk a little bit about, I guess, what value they see in the software that we're creating, and also software like AgriWebb, where we can start to digitalize our farm footprint and share that really simply. A couple of things that we identified early on was that we needed a single source of truth for the supply chain. So we needed to be able to compare apples with apples and not have a reporting metric that worked in one instance, but potentially not. As we moved into the supply chain, things like feedlots and processors needed to all report back using the same kind of language. So we've gone ahead and created a tool that looks at the whole red meat supply chain. We're also moving into other commodities next year to really try and simplify this process, from a reporting perspective, but also from a data entry perspective. And the integration with AgriWebb is a really great example of that, where we can pull a lot of farm data through and create an emissions report. Once we've got the data collated, it sort of takes, with the AgriWebb integration, sort of 20, 30 minutes. So that's what I'd love to just give everyone a live demonstration of today. And then I think it's important to kind of talk about where the data goes. So once you agree to the informed permission consent to share information, what is shared, what is not shared, and who gets to see that. And we've gone to a lot of detail and depth to really make sure that the data sharing is in the control of the user. So the ability to turn that data sharing on and off whenever you choose to, and the ability to share with whomever you choose to. That's been a really key fundamental pillar of the software that we're building, to keep that control in the hands of our users. So we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But I thought, just if I had everyone's attention for 10 minutes, it might be worthwhile touching on, I guess, some of the learnings that we've taken from the supply chain and the conversations we've had over the last little while, and why would a farm business use Ruminati or use the Ruminati AgriWebb integration to create a baseline report? It's a question that we get asked often, and it's a pretty valid one. Essentially, when we think about the emissions that come out of our business, they're in the form of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. The little diagram here gives you a bit of a breakdown of how that works. But essentially, as they move out of our business, they become everyone else downstream from us. So be that a feedlot, be that JBS, be that Woolworths, everyone else's scope 3 emissions. And really, the appetite at the moment is for these large corporations to commit to what's called science-based target initiatives. And that means that the organizations have to reduce emissions within their supply chain, and those scope 3 emissions that I inherit from our businesses need to be addressed in the forms of mitigation and reduction. So we can see here some examples of organizations that a lot of whom are our customers here in Australia, that have committed to science-based target initiatives, and really, to achieve those targets, they're going to have to work with their suppliers, such as us as farmers, to start to reduce their emissions without buying offsets. So I think that's just a really important bit of background there as we work through the tool to give it context as to why we do it. And some really great programs being developed around the world, some of the best of which are here in Australia, where we hear the statistic that agriculture is 15% of emissions, global emissions, which is a fair and valid statement. But I think what's often lost is that we also represent 50% of the solution. And so the ability to sequester carbon back into our landscapes, 50% of Australia's landmass is owned by agricultural land here in Australia. And that represents a really big opportunity to organizations like those on the page here to reduce their emissions at a really effective investment level on farm. So the logos that I've got up there are all organizations that have programs running currently, where they're incentivizing farmers, be that with financial incentives or otherwise, to reduce their emissions and create that integrated supply chain. So I guess as an explainer as to why we feel this is something that's worth talking about today and valid to the farming community, that's a little bit of background as to where that position comes from. I'll just open the floor to any questions as I pull up the tool to demonstrate. Jan, if there's any questions there, I can't actually see them at the moment, but I'll just stop sharing this and throw to the floor if there's any questions that have come off. I was meant to mention, Jan, as well, I apologize about the poll. If you wanted to run the poll or not today, Amber just had a note there to just throw that out as I bring this.
Yeah,
screen.
perfect. The poll is now up. So just for everyone, have you ever attempted to baseline your farm business emissions before? We'd love to hear from you. So that's running now.
Babbo. And if we share here, can you see that okay there,
Yeah,
Jen?
that's perfect. Yeah.
Fantastic. So this is my personal farm with the farm data that I've entered over the last 3 years. So we're going to dive into that and really look at the tool and the way it operates. And essentially, there's a few steps before this, just mindful of time. So I'll try and leave a bit of time to have some good conversation at the end. So I'll just do a bit of a whistle-stop tour to show the functionality and how it all comes together. But I will skip a few of the basic administrative steps, but you'll come to ruminati.com.au and create an account. You can use your Google login credentials or just like you'd create an email address. And then the first thing you're going to do is dive in here. As I mentioned before, we've developed this ability to talk about measure the whole supply chain. So if you want to create an emissions report for your farm, or if you're in the feedlot sector or processing sector, you just select one of these. And then we go through and we create our farm name. Here we pick up which commodities we're working in. So there's a number of different methodologies behind, I guess, the user interface that we see here. And we identified that those methodologies needed to be integrated. So a lot of farm businesses have sheep, but they also have grain. And you can't report on the full business unless you have integration between those two emissions reports. So now we've brought them all together as one, so they can sit there and essentially talk to each other so that we calculate the whole of business. So we'd select which enterprises, we can select all three, we can select just the one, and that will doctor which information we see when we start to create our report. Then we can punch in our pick number. We also enter a grower's code if we're got the crops in. And also this is where we'd have our AgriWebb integration. So if we're pulling data out of AgriWebb in the form of our map and also our DSE or our livestock numbers, that can also come through here. I've already got mine set up, so I won't do that today, but that's an instant ping back to the AgriWebb website, and then you'll enter your details there and plug all that in. But if we were to submit that, we then dive in and create our farm map. So ducking up here to the hills behind Tumut to the farm. And basically, we're just going to go through and select the land titles that make up our farm. So we're trying to keep this really light touch. We're pulling from a data set called National Maps here. If you have your AgriWebb integration, this will pre-populate. So you'll actually get to skip this step, and a lot of the information just feeds straight through. I'm just going to jump out of this screen and duck back into my own interface so that we can look at the actual farm data entry process. So once you've created your farm, what we're going to do is go through and enter our inputs for that financial year. So we're working retrospectively for financial years. So this year we're looking at 22, 23. What were the inputs that I had in my business to create the product that I produced? And this is the same process if we're in mining or construction or any other sector outside of agriculture. Really, everyone's starting to have to report now. So Ruminati's approach is let's make this really simple and effective for our farming community. So a lot of nearly all the information we have to enter for this is pre-existing in our tax return. So there shouldn't be any curly questions here that we're not aware of as we move through. But essentially, we're just going to enter our pasture inputs. We hit submit, and then we move through the form. Here we're going to enter our consumables, so our petrol, our diesel. Kilowatt hours we found was a bit of a tricky one, so we add the ability to just add in your bill for that financial year, and that'll, again, using some smarts from the NEM database, we can pull out what that would have been in kilowatt hours. Then we look at our livestock numbers. Again, with that AgriWebb integration, it skips a step here, and these numbers pull straight in. If you know the number, you can enter it as a whole number, or we can work through a calculator here that allows you to populate out the livestock numbers that you have, and that'll do a conversion to either DSE in the south or adult equivalents if we're operating in the north, depending on which metric you're comfortable with. Both of them drive the same emissions factor and end up with the same emissions for that particular field. Then we've got cattle purchases. So we can see no cattle purchase for me last year. If we were to add them in, we select the region that they came from, the weight that they were when we purchased them, and then the number. This is driving our scope 3 emissions for any of those that are curious. So we're looking at how the emissions that we brought into our business, what were they? And as I said before, when JBS buys the cattle to put on feed at Yanco, they're going to be purchasing our scope. Our scope 1 emissions become their scope 3s, and that'll become important when we see this completed report. So our sheep purchases, we trade a few sheep at home. So we've got, again, similar to the livestock, you can add as many of these sheep purchases in as you need if you've got multiple trades throughout the year. Next one is going to be our supplementary feed. So here, again, our scope 3 emissions coming in the form of supplementary feed, grain, hay, and cottonseed. And then we get a chance to look at the sequestration. So what tree plantings have we had on the farm since 1990 that actually come off our emissions profile? So in this instance, again, the first year you're doing this, you'll have more tree plantings to plug in, obviously, and then going forward, it's just additional ones that were part of that year. So because we have a location of the farm, we can determine the types of trees that will grow and also the soil type in that region. Then we plug in the age and we can dive back into our farm map and just draw in any of the tree lines that we've planted pre this baseline, post 1990. And that's going to give us a level of sequestration, which will come off our footprint. So we've got that. And then lastly, we've got this field here, which is to look at our productivity. So this is driving our, what we call intensity, how much product we produced for the amount of emissions that we produced in the same term. So here we're looking at our red meat, our beef production, sheep meat production, our wool, and the yield. If we had cropping in there, there'd be another field that you populate for the cropping. And then we allocate our consumables, so petrol and diesel and electricity. And what that does is by pro-ratering that across the different commodities, we can say with confidence that this kilogram of product had these emissions associated with its production. And that's a really important metric that the supply chain's wanting to start to understand. So just ducking out of that, that's basically the baselining data entry piece completed. Then we've got a data log here if we want to have this audited down the track, or if there are third-party checks that we need to put in place. Also gives you the opportunity to come in and edit these fields if you need to check. On your Xero account or with a bookkeeper, you've got the ability to go in and have a look at those and change them at any point. But once you're comfortable with that, we're going to hit our report. And that's our baseline report for the 2022-23 financial year. We've got our total emissions, less that small amount of sequestration from the tree planting. And then our net emissions here is the output of those two. And then beef intensity, sheep intensity, and wool intensity. So looking at kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of live weight or product produced. And the same again, if you had a cropping enterprise in there, it's just not something we do at home. And then a breakdown here of our emissions. So the types of gases that are responsible. Spoiler alert, I think everyone's heard enough times on the ABC or in the newspaper that really a lot of our emissions are coming from methane. 95% of the time that we do this, it's well above 85%. Carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide slightly less. And then we've got our scopes. So we spoke about this earlier, our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And really, as we said before, heavily weighted towards the scope 1s because of the way methane's accounted for and the amount of methane that we're producing in our livestock businesses. But as that moves downstream to our stakeholders, they will inherit those scopes and they will become their scope 3s. So the product that they're buying in to produce their own product. So that is the baselining report. I'm just going to pull up here for a moment and ask if there are any questions on that before I move on to the next little piece to present.
We've actually got quite a few questions coming through, Will. So up to you if you want to start answering some of them now or if you want to wait to the Q&A.
Perhaps we'll leave it for the Q&A. If there's a few there, sometimes if it's one or two, I can field them on the fly, but maybe we'll we'll congregate them all at the end. So really, we've got our baseline now, and we're going to look at what we can do to reduce those emissions. So the question we were asked time and time again by our users, the farmers that we spoke to in the early testing phase, is great, seems simple enough, but what does that number mean? So what does 8,225 tons of CO2 mean? Is that good, bad? Where do I sit? And what can I do about that? And I think that was a real light bulb moment for us, because there's been a lot of commitments and promises and targets set on our behalf. But what are we supposed to do about that today on farm in terms of practice change or start to implement strategies? There's a lot of really exciting technology, particularly being developed here in Australia, some of the best in the world, but can we access that? How do we start to move the dial? And so the next piece, which we term the so what piece, or the what next, allows us to look forward into time and look at what reduction strategies would really move the dial. So this is not so much about necessarily committing to a plan or a pledge, but rather looking at what we could do to start to move the dial. So here we've got our baseline year, 2021. Then last year we had the quite a big year here in the south where it rained a lot, and we traded some additional steers. That came with it a scope 3 emission in the form of those additional trade animals. And so our emissions did go up. And then this year, fairly less favourable conditions, shall we say, for the ag game. And so just by the nature of the environment that we're operating in, and also our appetite for risk at the moment, our emissions are just naturally low, and not through any necessary intention or practice change. But then what can we do now to start to plan our reduction strategies? And we identified that there's really two buckets that we could start to talk about. We could avoid our emissions, so avoid emitting them in the first place, but then also absorb our emissions back into our landscape. And so trying to use simple language to plan this out for growers so they can see which levers are really going to move the dial. We've got this broken down. So this is my forecast reduction. I'll step through that in a moment. I was just trying to turn a few of these features off so we could start from scratch. But the categories that we can look at are our pasture inputs, our consumables, our supplementary feed, and our livestock numbers. So remember, back in our baselining stage, we were entering this data. Now we have our real farm level data, not industry averages, and we can start to look at which activities we could implement to change our emissions profile. So this isn't necessarily about reducing inputs. Some instances we might increase inputs like urea to get time to market sooner, and that means that there's less livestock loading on the property because the steers are sold 3 months earlier. So it's really just a forecasting tool, nothing set in stone, and it allows us to start to look at which activities are really going to move the dial. So I'll just jump in and give a few quick demonstrations here. So if we were looking at managing a supplementary feed, we can move this forward or back, so we can increase it or decrease it. But if we looked at what the impact of reducing our supplementary feed by 60% would be, we can plan that out for any particular financial year that we decide. Let's go with 2025. We can apply that. We can also look at, we might duck up here and increase our urea application and our fertilizer application to increase soil fertility and in turn our time to market. But then we're also going to be able to dive back in and turn these steers off slightly quicker, so we can, again, move these forward and back. If you're buying the neighbour and you know that you're going to have additional livestock coming into the business, you can plan and forecast what impact that's going to be. But let's look at turning the steers off, and we'll do that in 2028. And the same with the lambs because of those additional inputs. And, spoiler alert, because of the heavy loading of methane, and the way that that's accounted for, that's going to have a pretty solid impact on our emissions. So here's our baseline year, then our current year, and then we're working through and we're looking at a 7 and 8% reduction as we start to implement some of these strategies. If we were to action these strategies and they become a reality, next year when you baseline, you'll change that baseline information or that emissions report information to reflect some of these practice changes, and it will come off your baseline. for that year. Alternatively, we can look at absorbing emissions back into our landscape. So things like revegetation or tree plantings or soil carbon projects. Duck in here and look at a tree planting. Again, here we're pinging out to a CSIRO data set, which allows us to give a real-time estimation of the impact of a tree planting or a soil test specific to the polygon that you draw to the farm. So again, we can pick up the soil type and the growth rate of the trees. So if we were to estimate, okay, what's the impact of joining up this tree line to make a bit of a corridor? Not committing to anything as yet, but I just want to see what the impact will be. We can jump in there and see, okay, now we've got a really interesting story to tell to our supply chain of our forecast, a 31% reduction over the next 6-7 years. And perhaps there's an appetite for that supply chain to either preferentially work with us, or what we're finding is there's a real appetite to make sure that we do achieve that reduction, or at least a certain percentage of it. Even 50% of that reduction would be well above most of those SBTI targets that I mentioned earlier, to really work cooperatively with us as producers to make sure we do achieve those goals. So whether that's price incentives or subsidizing some of these activities, tree planting or investment in genetics, those sorts of conversations are becoming more and more accepted, and really where the supply chain sees as a cost-effective way for them to move the dial. So that's I guess, the enterprise tool. The same process is applied to a feedlot. If you go through and measure your feedlot emissions, you create a baseline and you look at strategies for reduction, and also the processing facilities. So the abattoirs and the secondary processors that might take that processed meat and turn it into a product that's sold in the retail stores. So that's the tool, essentially, and the tool that most people on the call will be interacting with. Just quickly, and just confirm for me, Jen, that this is coming up. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's perfect.
There.
Yeah.
I just think it's really important to show everyone where their data goes and what's displayed and what's not. So as I mentioned before, this is just our dummy data set. But what we mentioned before is we really wanted to keep the control in the hands of the user. And so no raw data is actually shared in the sense of this is how many cattle you have and this is how much urea you had and this is your exact farm location. What we do is we share information around emissions, so more statistics around emissions. So here we can see on this particular dashboard, it would be different for any end user or customer that wanted to access this information, total emissions in their supply chain, their average emissions, and then intensities for each of the specific commodities that they're looking at. So obviously some supply chains wouldn't have wool, but they would have grain. So this is fully customized to represent the commodities in their supply chain. There's a number of other features that we're developing which aren't in this demonstration, but you sort of, just for everyone's interest, get the gist. What they're also really interested in is seeing who has a baseline number, so who has measured of the people in their supply chain that they've invited to be part of this program. And then who's got a reduction strategy, so who's looking at pathways to reduce their emissions. And I think most importantly, what is that pathway? So if it's trees, if it's genetics, if it's soil, how can I, as a stakeholder in the supply chain, start to understand what the appetite is for, let's say, a tree planting in Tumut? Are there 100 growers that I can identify in my supply chain that would be interested in doing that? And will that help me achieve somewhere in the region of this 30% reduction, or even half of that, as I mentioned earlier, would be well and above most of the targets that people are looking for. So that's the data sharing piece. There's, just ducking back here, the way that is linked comes through here, what we call our corporate partners. And so we can go through and create a connection. So that demo organization was the piece I just was looking at there. So we can agree to share with the demo organization. We can look at which farm we want to share. So remembering that there might be certain farms that are wool producing farms that we don't need to share into certain supply chains. So you can, if you're running a multiple farm business, you can be selective as to which information you're sharing with which partner. Once we select that, and you can add multiple versions of this, then we go through the terms, really talking about the information that's shared and certainly the information that is not. And once we're comfortable with that, we can click share, and then we have the ability to cancel these connections at any time. We also need what they call a digital handshake. So at the other end, our partner needs to agree that, yes, that's the information that I was looking for. They haven't shared the wrong farm or the wrong piece of information. I agree to accept that, and both parties have the ability to turn that on and off as they see fit. So just watching the clock, I'm going to pull up there. But essentially, that's the tool that we've created, or the solution we've created, and the data sharing mechanism that we've created as well. So I might just throw back to you, Jen, for any questions, thoughts, feedback.
Yeah, great. Everyone's just done the poll, and overwhelmingly we're seeing a lot of people say they haven't attempted to baseline their farm business emissions before. So this is, come at a really good time where we can showcase what Ruminati is doing in this space. 63% said no, and 37% said yes. So that's really interesting. I guess just to kind of round things out, I mean, this is just an example of, some customers who have already turned on that integration with Ruminati and AgriWebb. I think the big thing that we want to really point out here is just being able to make the invisible visible, and really unlocking those baselines to help people start putting some plans into action. So Harrison, Hayden, that both in the same space, like really loving the fact that it's super easy to use the Ruminati integration just to generate an emissions report. And it's the same for Harrison in the next slide. Pretty straightforward. They had to just provide a map and their stock numbers, and then be able to generate a report for that year. So it's really easy for anybody on this call as an AgriWebb customer. If you're not an AgriWebb customer, you can still do it. Simply just jump onto the Ruminati website, create an account, and get going. And I guess with that, we can move over to the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions for you, Will. So maybe if we don't get onto every single question, we'll make sure when we send the recording out this afternoon that we have some answers to all of these questions, because I appreciate there's a lot of content we've just covered, and we want to make sure that you all have an answer to those questions. So Ross has asked, does Ruminati differentiate between cyclical and biogenic methane and other emissions?
Yeah, so very pertinent question, Ross. And essentially, there are a range of different metrics or algorithms that we can use at the back end. So the real distinguishers there are GWP star, so global warming potential star, which is more accurate at accounting for the biogenic nature of methane, or the GWP 100, which is kind of the standardly accepted approach. At the moment, the IPCC does allow for dual reporting, so we can report on both GWP star and GWP 100. We've done a fair bit of work in that space, and we do, I guess, have that algorithm built. We're still in that testing phase to see what the demand is. There's some industry bodies, Cattle Australia and a few other organizations that are really pushing to promote or to talk about the biogenic nature of methane. And I think once there's a decision on that, we'll just adopt it. Our hope is that we can remain somewhat indifferent and really just report the most widely accepted peer-reviewed science, and then be that scoreboard where it's presented in a concise and simple manner. So currently we do not, so we just talk about GWP 100, but we do think that there's a really good argument to have dual reporting in there, which would account for GWP star and the biogenic nature of methane. The other thing to that is, I think whichever dial we choose as an industry to report on as an industry, we really want to show progress. And so what can we do, whether it's star or 100, what are we doing to change our practices and reduce our methane or reduce our emissions generally? Would be my answer to that one. Ross, does that answer your question, mate?
Yeah, Ross has just commented saying Yes, perfect.
Great.
Great. Nicolette has asked, what is the recommended baseline year? If you have the info data for, say, 3 to 5 years, do you calculate each year or do you simply start with the most recent year?
So our tool actually goes back to 2020, Nicola, and I think the ability really context data needs context. And so if you have the capacity to go back and baseline each individual year from 2020, we'd strongly recommend doing that because it starts to give you a bit of a rolling average. So you saw there in my data where I had quite a big spike in 2022. Now that's been circumvented by a lower emissions number this year. And if we had 3, 4, 5 years of data or 10 years of data, we can start to pick at the middle point a bit more accurately. So currently the tool does allow users to go back to 2020. And if you've got those records, we'd recommend doing that. However, no time like the present, don't let that be a limitation to start that baselining journey, because really, once you have that baseline and you're progressing, which most businesses are just naturally starting to become more efficient and better at producing their product, that inherently has a relationship with lower emissions. And so if we can capture our baseline position sooner rather than later, it allows us to have that reference point to demonstrate that we've changed against that. But short answer to your question is yes, you can go back to 2020, and that would be really fantastic if you could.
Perfect. We've got a question from Jeff. So he's actually got 2 questions. So do you think eventually we will be penalized for the emissions we produce, is his first question. And then also specifically, what emissions are we talking about? Methane, carbon? What are your thoughts?
Yep, cool. So will we be penalized, excluded from markets? It's a really good question. One of our customers has set a global target to build and open 1 new fast food restaurant a day for the next, I think it's 20 or 30,000 restaurants. And so that will require a lot of meat. And in turn, Australia is very well positioned to be, as the demand grows, to have these climate credentials and sustainability credentials. Australia is really, really well positioned to supply that product with those credentials. So I don't think that there's going to be enough product to satisfy the demand. So I don't see there being a situation where you're excluded from a market. However, there could potentially arise a situation where you're preferentially treated. So they make sure that they do procure this product because it demonstrates change. So I think it's a really important distinction to say that this product was X and now it's X less 10%. Now what X was doesn't really matter because it's demonstrating improvement. So my humble opinion is I don't think we'll be excluded. Market access, yes, there is growing regulations in the EU around having sustainability credentials and meeting certain targets. The software that we're talking about here today would well and above exceed those expectations. And so just having line of sight of your number and your progress is certainly sufficient to retain that social license and that market access at the time being. I would hazard a guess that will ratchet up over time, but certainly sufficient for the moment. And the second part of the question, Jennifer, sorry, I just forgot.
Yeah, of course. And also specifically, what emissions are we talking about? Methane, carbon?
Yep. So we're talking about all emissions here, so bundled up together. And the earlier question, I think it was from Ross, around the biogenic nature and how we report methane. We convert everything back to what they call CO2 equivalents, so CO2e. And what that is they give certain gases based on their radiative forcing or how much they heat up the atmosphere, a multiple factor. So carbon is 0, methane is 28 to 32, depending on which papers you're reading. And then nitrous oxide, I believe, is 320 times multiple. So to convert all of those numbers back to a single figure, they do all those multiplications and they talk about all in entirety, CO2e, so carbon equivalents, is all of those gases bundled together. So when I say my business has 10 kilograms of CO2e per kilogram of product, I'm saying that the carbon and the nitrous oxide and the methane all bundled in, and they do all the science to give me a single figure, which is 10 kilograms. That takes into account all the gases in my business.
All right. Bruce has asked a question. How do you take account for bushfires or management burns?
So another poignant question. The carbon that's stored above ground is, I think, something that our software certainly isn't representing accurately yet. The above ground carbon stocks really is the next challenge for us. We've got some really great integrations coming soon, which will give us more visibility on those changes. But if we were to sequester a heap of carbon in the form of trees and a fire comes through and eradicates that, using the current methodology, as I understand it, that carbon is lost and would need to be sequestered again. So it wouldn't necessarily be an emission on your baseline, but it wouldn't be the ongoing sequestration if you remove those trees from the environment. And the second point there, Jen, was around the tree.
Yeah, so how do you take account for bushfires or management burns?
Yeah, so it's one and the same there. We feel we have some work to do to, I guess we talk about color in the picture more. I think we're not capturing the whole story yet. And we've got a couple of really great solutions there, which we're working on in terms of additional software and additional connections to really fill that picture in. But my understanding of the methodology and the legislation would mean that any of the burns that are removed, you forego that ongoing sequestration.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a question from Paul. How does dry lick supplementation fit into feed amounts?
So another, I think, important distinction at the back end of that platform, which we just ran through, is some smarts by Richard Eckhart and the University of Melbourne called the Sheep and Beef Greenhouse Accounting Framework. And some people may have seen that, where it's a really, I think, academically brilliant piece of work which allows for the measuring of emissions on farm. We've encoded that to make it somewhat more palatable and sympathetic to our users. In that framework, and we've sort of just gone word for word, they don't look at urea or nitrogen in the form of urea in supplementary feed licks. It's just not accounted for. And there's a range of other things that are omitted. So basically, those decisions stem down from the IPCC in the way that has been mandated. And then certain academic communities have appropriated those rules or emissions factors into these tools. Supplementary feed, a supplementary lick is not one of those things. So it's currently not accounted for. The tools are changing every couple of months. And so we're under the impression that will be included soon. I guess one of the benefits of the software we're creating is, as those tools evolve and they start to become more accurate and emissions factors are changing and this space is ever evolving, because it's a live system, it's updating those numbers and emissions factors in real time. So we just change our algorithm in the back, which will give you then the most recent version of the tool, as opposed to if you've got a spreadsheet sitting on your desktop, once you've completed it, it doesn't interact with the changes. So long answer to your question, I apologize, but currently it's not included because it's not included in the greenhouse accounting framework.
Okay. We'll take two more questions because I know we're just close to 2. Rebecca says, I have 18 months worth of SBGAF data, but have only been using AgriWebb for 6 months. Will I be able to enter both lots of data into Ruminati?
Yes. So there's a feature which I should have touched on, which allows you to drag and drop your SBGAF tools straight in, and it will populate the whole program. So if you've got SBGAF from 2021, you can drag and drop that and populate. There's a few other pieces like the map that you have to do just one off to create your account. And then you could drag and drop those preceding SBGAFs into the software. And then you'd also be able to then integrate current data or ongoing data with the AgriWebb with the AgriWebb services.
Perfect. And we've just got one from Philip. How do you accommodate consumables bought in but not applied during the year they were purchased? For example, chemicals, fertilizer, and 5 ton of firewood consumed during the year.
So chemicals and fertilizer, if it's what's applied. So if it's sitting in the shed, it doesn't need to go into your baseline. Firewood, also not included, so you get away with that one. It's not part of our, a bit like the nitrous oxide in the urea lick. It's not part of the greenhouse accounting framework, so it's not in the baseline. So you can rip in.
Perfect. Well, look, I think we might end it there. There's still a lot of questions coming through, so I'm sorry we weren't able to answer them all, but we will definitely respond to you, and we'll get those answers out to you this afternoon once we send the recording. But I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us, to ask your questions. I know an hour out of your day is a lot, so we really do appreciate it. We do have, I think if you can go to the next slide, Will, hopefully
Sure.
that comes up. Perfect. So yeah, just to let you know, so you will receive a recording of the webinar at the end of this afternoon. We also do have a 30% discount running until next Wednesday. So if you are an AgriWebb customer and if you would like to join, please get in contact with myself or Jack, and we'll be able to help you along the way. And then just finally, we also do want to answer your questions. If you are keen to learn more about Ruminati, you can get in contact with the Ruminati team. Lily Rogers, who's been on the call this entire time, is part of the support team. So if you are really keen to learn more about how you can get things up and running, we'll make sure that we'll send out her contact details so you can reach out. Cool. All righty then. Well, thank you again for all your time, and we'll see you all in the new year, 2024. Here we come.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you so much for pulling it together, and thanks everyone for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Have a great Christmas. Hope it's a wet one.
Definitely. Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, guys.